Welcome to Commission Ed, the Air Force Officer Podcast. Here we explore the training and development of America's leaders in the application of air power and the profession of arms. The views expressed are those of the hosts and do not reflect the official policy or position of the United States Air Force, Department of Defense, or the U.S. government.
I'm Reed Gann, and this week I'm your host for Commission Ed. Last week we had an episode that Colin recorded in celebration of the Christmas holiday, and I wanted to take the opportunity this week for New Year's to record a quick episode. First and foremost, we want to wish all our listeners a very happy New Year, and we hope that this finds you and yours happy, well, and in a good place for this next year of 2020. I wanted to put down a couple thoughts about New Year's. New Year's is a time of reflection, a time about looking forward, and we think it's a really important characteristic of a good officer that they can regularly and accurately assess self. In other words, determine where they are and where they should be. And hopefully we'll give you a couple tools this week on how you can do that, as well as how you can help get to where you want to be. In order to do that, you have to ask yourself, what are your strengths or what are your weaknesses? Maybe determine what your blind spots are. And goals can help you to overcome those weaknesses and build your strengths. So, quick rant here. I'm not really a big fan of New Year's resolutions per se. I've always been a fan of goal setting, but I don't like to wait. I firmly believe that as soon as you identify that there's something you need to address, you should start immediately. I don't like this idea of, I'll set that as a New Year's resolution. But I recognize that a lot of people, this is the only time of year many folks do assess self, and that's understandable. So we're going to take that and we're going to go with it. Just a quick note, I've done some sort of self-reflection and goal setting every week for pretty much the last 25 years, and I've benefited a lot from that. So this is something I feel passionately about, and it's definitely helped me in my life. So hopefully we can give you guys some tools that can help you out. But never a better time than the present. Start today. There's a couple different types of goals that I like to set. Many of you may have heard these, and if you have, hopefully we can give you some ways to think about them before. But I like to use two different goal setting tools or types, if you will. The first are SMART goals, and the next are Everest goals. We'll talk about SMART goals first. So SMART is an acronym. It stands for specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. And when it comes to setting a goal, let's compare two different goals and how they fit into this idea of a SMART goal. Let's say that your goal is to get better on your PFA, your physical fitness assessment. And your goal that you write down is, I want to do better on my PFA this year. That really isn't all that useful. And why? Well, it's not specific. It's not measurable. There is a score associated with your PFA, but what's quote-unquote better? Yes, you can achieve it, and it is relevant to what you do, and you sort of have given it a time bound. You said this year. But other than that, this isn't going to help you make very specific differences in what you do in order to achieve some change. So let's compare that with this statement. I want to reduce my 1.5 mile run time by 45 seconds on my May 2020 PFA versus the time I set in my May 2019 PFA. This is a good example of a specific or SMART goal. It's very specific. It says exactly what component of the PFA you want to improve on, how much you want to improve on it. It gives you a measurement. It says, I want to reduce my run time by 45 seconds. You could even get more measurable and say my run time was X, and now I want it to be 45 seconds less than that. Is 45 seconds achievable? Well, it depends. If you were already running a 7-minute, 30-second mile and a half, which I've seen, 45 seconds off of that might be quite a task. However, if you're running, maybe a 13-minute or a 14-minute, 45 seconds should be reasonably achievable. So it all depends on the individual. That's kind of up to you. Also, I want to point this out. Something that's achievable is something that you can influence the outcome. A lot of times we set unit goals or goals for an organization. And sometimes when we sit down to set goals, we don't have control of the outcome. If you don't have control of the outcome or sole control of the outcome, it's not really a goal that you can necessarily influence. So think about that as you're going through your goal setting process. Relevant, yes, your PFA matters to you. It matters to your career. It matters to the Air Force. So it absolutely matters and is something that is important for you to work on. And time bound, it absolutely gives you a time frame. With this type of SMART goal, you can then set a lot of other goals, smaller goals, in order to help you get there. So that's just one example or one tool you can use to set goals. Pretty common. I've seen this in a lot of settings well before my time in the Air Force and since, but another tool for those that may be looking for one. Another goal type that I like to use and that I've heard from others was actually shared with me by a friend while I was an instructor at OTS. It's called an Everest goal, or a stretch goal is another way I've heard these called. If you think about Everest as the tallest mountain in the world in the Himalayas, a lot of people could set the goal to climb Everest, but not many people are going to actually have that opportunity. The idea with an Everest goal is it may be something nearly impossible to achieve, but it gives you some sort of direction or context for all the rest of your goals. Another one that you could think of that could fall in this idea of an Everest goal is to be a millionaire. A lot of people are not going to have the opportunity to become an actual millionaire, and you can define that in a number of ways, but let's just use having $1 million cash on hand in the bank as our quote-unquote be a millionaire goal. Being a millionaire may not necessarily be achievable for a large portion of the population, but it does provide context and shape all the rest of the goals in the way you live your life in a fashion that could help you get closer to that. It's kind of the idea of shoot for the stars, land on the moon. If you're out there trying to get in some direction, maybe you'll at least get a few steps down the path. Now, that doesn't mean that Everest goals or stretch goals should be impossible. This makes me think of President Kennedy's speech where he says that within the decade we will go to the moon. That, at the time, was pretty unrealistic. Yet, we were able to achieve that. So, I also don't want people to think Everest goals are impossible or things that they simply won't ever do, because sometimes you can actually get pretty close. And it's only in pushing yourself can you really determine what you're made of. These stretch goals or Everest goals can give you influence and direction and help with the context for the rest of your goal setting activity. So hopefully those are just a couple things that you can use as you think about where you are and where you'd like to be and how you can close that gap if you identify some of those things. I want to leave you with a couple parting thoughts on this quick New Year's episode with a quote from a famous speech given by Theodore Roosevelt in April of 1899. At the time, he was the governor of New York, but as we know, he would go on to become President of the United States. And this is from a speech called The Strenuous Life. I wish to preach not the doctrine of ignoble ease, but the doctrine of the strenuous life, the life of toil and effort, of labor and strife, to preach that highest form of success which comes not to the man who desires mere easy peace, but to the man who does not shrink from danger, from hardship, or from bitter toil, and who out of these wins the splendid ultimate triumph. Before we go too much farther, this applies to our sisters as well as our brothers, men and women everywhere. I really like this because, yes, it has a very Victorian stoicism flavor, but it helps me remember a very important thing. You have to put in effort to achieve your goals. You have to put in effort. You have to put in work. There's a quote I saw once on a desk, right? No author, it looks like a motivational poster. There's no shortcut to any place worth going. And I have found that to be absolutely true. If there is something that is of value, it's going to take some sacrifice. It's going to take some work. And so to all of you this New Year's, from both Colin and myself, we want to wish you a happy new year, but we also want you to get out there, to get after it, and we hope that all your takeoffs and landings will always be equal. And this is Reed Gann, and thanks for listening to this episode of Commission Ed.
Thank you for listening to Commission Ed, the Air Force Officer Podcast. The views and opinions of the authors expressed herein do not state or reflect those of the U.S. government and shall not be used for advertising or product endorsement purposes. Mention of any specific commercial products, process, or service by trade name, trademark, manufacturer, or otherwise does not necessarily constitute nor imply its endorsement, recommendation, or favoring by the U.S. government. The mention of companies by name is solely for the purpose of discussion and should not be implied as endorsement.